Welcome to the Bible's Greatest Mysteries from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and sadly, this is our last session with Aaron Lipkin. We could have talked to him all year.
We could have, but this may be the most fascinating of the topics that we discussed.
We saved the best till last.
Oh, yes.
Really, really have. And again, this is a location that you can go with us on if you go to Israel with us in 2022. In fact, we'll probably go there every time we go to Israel because it is an amazing experience. And boy, I'm going to leave you hanging because we're not going to tell you what it is until we introduce Aaron. But you know how things are.
Oh, yes.
Tom's always got something, so the bag.
And remember, you can suggest topics for future programs by sending us an email at bgm@skywatchtv.com. That's bgm@skywatchtv.com.
In fact, I think I've got a couple of questions in here.
Oh,
yeah. I looked ahead. I cheated. Oh, boy, some of these questions are really, really... Again, we're going to have, next week, we'll have an episode where Derek and I just address your questions.
Right.
And talk about some of our own research. So we'll dig into some of these broader questions at length. We'll dance around and because some of these are really hard to answer.
Yes.
Like Diane Poor, does the manner in which a body is handled, ritually preserved, cremated, buried, abused, have any potential spiritual implications to a person after death, either good or bad? Could ritualizing a body shortly after death cause harm spiritually? Well, I'm going to say no on that because what happens to us after death is based on what happened to us, what choices we made prior to death.
absolutely. Anything that would affect you after death in that way would be an abrogation of your free will, and God will not do that. He created all of us with free will, human and those spirits in the unseen realm, angels and demons and so forth.
Yes, but that being said, the person who left the body behind, that spirit has gone to eternity.
Yes.
And if he or she chose Christ as Savior, then that is the eternal reward. But if the decision was, no, I don't really want to be covered in the blood of Christ, then sadly, that is not eternal reward, it's eternal punishment. But the people who do engage in ritualistic activity with regards to that shell left behind by the person, that body, ancestor worship, and that sort of activity, that affects the people doing it.
Right.
Not the person who left the body.
Exactly. If we were to allow for that something done to the body of someone who is already in the spirit realm, affecting what happens to them in the spirit realm, then what about people who are perish in unfortunate accidents?
Yes.
Like a ship goes down at sea, or a fire, or what have you. What happens to the body after death has no bearing on the condition of the spirit after death.
The interesting thing, though, is that the fallen realm have convinced some humans, reaching back into antiquity, that if you engage in rituals with the body, dress it up, take it out, dance around with it, give it food, that those are ways to sort of connect again with your dead ancestor. The fact is, these aren't ancestors that are animating or speaking or whatever to the people involved in this. These are demons.
Correct. And we wrote about that at length in our book, Veneration, which basically traces the belief system that ancestors needed to be venerated and appeased because, frankly, if you don't feed them every month, there was a belief that they would get angry, and that continues down to the present day. There are certain religions that still hold that view.
Oh, exactly. Well, we could never cover everything, so we recommend that you take a look at our book, Veneration, and Giants, Gods, and Dragons. And we are writing a book right now that's going to be out next year that I think will address many of these things. It has to do with the satanic kingdom.
Absolutely.
Tom's also given us a couple of stories to talk about. We are praying that we have enough time. Jesus, son of Mary.
Oh, yes. This inscription found in
Jezreel.
The Jezreel Valley, which was such an important location historically in Israel, but even today, it's very fertile farmland. It's looking down from Mount Carmel at the Jezreel Valley is like looking into the American Midwest.
It's beautiful.
It is.
It is beautiful. Every square inch of land is taken advantage of and used in some way.
But in a church, a Byzantine church built in the 5th century A.D., so about 100 years after Constantine had legalized the faith.
Right.
The Eastern Romans had built a church in the Jezreel Valley and found an inscription that was on the lintel of the church that makes reference to Jesus, son of Mary.
Wow, that is incredible.
This discovery just announced back in January by the Israel Antiquities Authority, and this makes reference to a bishop by the name of Theodosius.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the miserable Thomas.
Who is the miserable Thomas? Poor Thomas. Not the disciple. It's a different Thomas.
Yes.
Because much later.
Yes, Theodosius at the time was the archbishop who was based in the city of Beth Shean, which is in the Jordan Valley.
Oh, yeah.
At the eastern end of the Jezreel Valley.
The other story that he's got in here is about the mystery of Tel Rekesh.
Tel Rekesh. This Tel in the Levant in Israel is just a mound of ruins. As civilizations over the centuries would build and rebuild their cities, they would build on top of the ruins of the previous level. So at Megiddo, the Tel had something like 28 levels of civilization, which is why it's a hill there overlooking the Jezreel Valley.
You know, this is actually a really interesting spot because according to this story, no one else had excavated it.
What's amazing is that with all of the excavations, the research that's been done in Israel, especially since 1967, that there are still major sites like this that have not yet been dug up.
Well, Tel Rekesh, it sits at the confluence of two rivers, which makes it even more interesting to me because spiritually speaking, when you have a confluence of rivers where they join, especially if there are three rivers that meet, it's a very hot spot for spiritual activity. Rivers are often used to describe the transition from our material space to a spiritual space.
Very often you had ritual sites and holy sites that were set up in those areas.
Yes, and some of them are actually mentioned in the Bible.
Yes. Well, still some questions about this mysterious Tel Rekesh site. This is something we'll have to put on our list when we can get over to Israel to do a research trip.
I know if they'll let us
visit.
in. They'll let us. Well, you need to go with us. You really, really do. We visit all the best sites, and one of the sites we visited last time, and we're going back, is Gilgal Refaim.
This was fantastic. It's definitely not on the tours.
It's an amazing site to visit. It's hard to get there. You have to ride in a Jeep, and you bump the whole way. And the funny thing is, when we were there, I kid you not, you and I totally missed a major feature on the ground because you can't tell it's there from the ground.
Well, we talk about that, and we discuss with Aaron Lipkin why this location, Gilgal Refaim, is called Israel's Stonehenge. That's next on the Bible's Greatest Mysteries.
With the official disclosure of UFOs moving full steam ahead, very few will be prepared for what is coming. The answers are now available in Josh Peck's groundbreaking new Skywatch Films documentary DVD, over 10 years in the making, entitled The Great Delusion, the second coming of Earth's oldest enemy, along with Dr. Thomas Horn's documentary-style expose on DVD, Rome and the Star God, and the late Chris Putnam's Vatican presentation on DVD, Astrobiology and the Vatican ET Connection. Josh Peck's new documentary, The Great Delusion, reveals for the first time why the Vatican is in possession of a telescope named the Lucifer device, why the ancient and mysterious Anasazi suddenly disappeared from the historic record, how alien abductions might be connected to the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, whether there is a secret alien-human hybridization program being conducted on Earth right now, if there is a connection between aliens and supernatural entities such as demons and fallen angels, and what we can do to prepare for what's ahead. You'll also see stunning reports on the UFO phenomenon by Dr. Thomas Horn, Josh Peck, L.A. Marzulli, Timothy Alberino, Nick Pope, Chris Putnam, Chuck Misler, and many more. You'll also receive Dr. Thomas Horn's documentary-style expose, Rome and the Star God, on DVD. Join Dr. Horn for this incredible expose on how the Vatican is not only willing to accept our alien brothers with open arms, but are actually enabling the arrival of the end-time star god, the Antichrist. But that's not all. We're also including the late Chris Putnam's shocking presentation entitled Astrobiology and the Vatican ET Connection on DVD, detailing the Vatican's plans to baptize aliens upon their arrival, and how contemporary societies will soon look to the aliens to be the saviors of humankind. Sold separately, these items have a retail value of $75. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling while supplies last. Prepare for full disclosure with the Great Delusion special offer, available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
The Bible's Greatest Mysteries is part of Skywatch TV, a viewer-supported ministry. Every show is available on demand at the Skywatch TV app for Roku, Apple TV, and our free mobile app. To learn more about us and our mission at Whispering Ponies Ranch, log on to skywatchtv.com.
This is the Bible's Greatest Mysteries. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining us in studio, the CEO of Lipkin Tours and the publisher of the works of the late Israeli archaeologist Adam Zertal, the Sisera's Secret, a book about the discovery of the fortress of the Canaanite general Sisera, The Footsteps of God, and also a series of DVDs called Hidden Israel. We are a big fan of his work, and this is why we love partnering with him for our tours of Israel. We welcome Aaron Lipkin back to the studios. One of the most fascinating sites that we visited, which was on the Golan Heights during our tour in 2019. Again, another site that is not on the typical tourist schedule, Gilgal Refaim, or Rujm al-Hiri, as it's called locally. This is a site that is called the Stonehenge of the Middle East. How is it possible that a site that large, an estimated 42,000 tons of stone, which is half again more stone than at Stonehenge, went undiscovered until Israel took the Golan from Syria in 1967?
That's a very good question, and I think that this question comes up all the time, not just about Rujum al-Hiri or Gilgal Refaim, but also many other sites, even the footprint structures that we discussed a few weeks back. These sites have been there for thousands of years, virtually almost undisturbed, and they're still there. And they weren't discovered until just in the last 30, 40 years. So how does that really happen? And I think the answer is that people living in the land of Israel always knew about them, but there was really never any sort of documentation or an academic or scientific publication that would be published 200 or 300 years ago that would just keep being in the libraries that people can reference to and go to. And also you have to remember that you always have these conquests of Israel. You have the Crusaders, you have the Muslims, you have the Byzantines. You always have civilizations coming in and erasing the heritage or the knowledge of the former civilization. And so really nobody's keeping the knowledge alive and intact through the ages. So, suddenly when Israel comes in and liberates Judea and Samaria and the Golan Heights, you have a government with academic institutions, with the technology to map the whole land, find these amazing sites that we speak about, and document them and research them, and so suddenly you see all these discoveries popping out that we can read about and visit. And definitely Gilgal Refaim, or the Israeli Stonehenge, is definitely one of these amazing sites. And I'm using the word mysterious not because I want people to check it out, but because it's really mysterious. No one really knows what it served. There are many theories about why people built it. But when you stand there, you see the enormous amount of energy that the ancient people that built it invested in it. There was something important about those circles that engulf one after the other. The site itself is located in the Golan Heights. Why is it there? Mount Hermon is visible. The gates of the different circles are oriented in a certain way that might be connected to the stars and the moon and the sun. So there's so many questions here, and nobody really has a clear and simple answer to what this site is.
The most recent excavation at Gilgal Refaim was done by Dr. Michael Freakman in 2012, where he and a partner did some dating on the site, which was assumed to be about the same age as Stonehenge, about 2500 BC. They used a technique called optically stimulated luminescence to test undisturbed material from under the inside of the central core, and they dated it to 3750 BC, much, much earlier, pre-Bronze Age, the Chalcolithic or Copper Age. And it was startling because at that period of history, to assume that you had that level of social organization was unexpected. Most experts didn't understand it. Not only did he find that, but he's also previously done excavations on a ridge just north, a quarter of a mile north, that when we looked at it in Google Earth, and you flew the first drone over this once we realized what we were looking at, a serpent-shaped mound that apparently is just created from dried volcanic rock expelled from an extinct volcano on the Golan, but it's covered with megalithic tombs, over 140 according to the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and suddenly and ritually abandoned around 3200 BC, somewhere there, where the dwellings were all ritually dismantled and buried like Joshua's altar was buried some 2,000 years later. The only guess that they have is that this was somehow connected to a cult of the dead.
And there is a tomb at the center.
Yes, there appears to be a dolmen in the very central core, and that leads to my next point, which is that the Golan Heights is just absolutely covered with dolmens, these megalithic funerary monuments. They're all over, and they date to about the time of Abraham, the newest ones, that is, but they all seem to be clustered either on the Golan or the ancient land of Bashan, and along the east side of the Jordan River, the Transjordan, which were the areas that were occupied by the Rephaim tribes, according to the book of Genesis.
Right.
What was going on in that region that relates to all of these megalithic structures to honor the dead?
I think that when people talk about Israel, talk about the land of Israel, they have to understand that Israel is not a normal land. I mean, we just read this past week in synagogues that God's eye is on the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. When God talks to the Israelites, He says, "Don't say that you come to the land of Israel because of your might, because of your strength. You're coming to Israel because I promised the land of Israel to your forefathers, and also because the Canaanites that are living in the land of Israel have behaved immorally, and the land vomited them." So there's something very spiritual about the land of Israel. And so when you talk about the Golan Heights, when you talk about the Jordan Valley, you're talking about not just these geographical areas or geographical structures. There's something very spiritual about them. And so, maybe this is an area that is experiencing a stronger spiritual battle there inside in those areas. Maybe it's some sort of a portal or some sort of a place that is an opening to a different world, maybe a different world.
That's something Sharon and I wrote about in our book Veneration, and we agree with you. In fact, we are working on another book that will explore that more deeply, but then also carry that over to the New World. But the cult of the dead among the pagan Canaanites and Amorites, who Joshua and the Israelites were tasked with pushing out of the land, venerating the dead, venerating what they thought were their ancestors, was a key part of that belief system. And there are a number of references in Scripture against this. Isaiah, in particular, wrote against this with references to the Rephaim, although in our English translations that word is translated as the dead or the departed, so we don't understand the context. Understanding that the Rephaim were believed to be the divinized dead of the Amorites, their kings, their mighty men who were of old, is key to understanding it. When Isaiah writes, among the smooth stones of the valley is your portion, they are your lot, condemning those who slaughter your children in the valleys under the clefts of the rocks. This was a condemnation of this cult of the dead that surrounded Joshua and the Israelites when they moved in, and yet 700 years later, Isaiah was still writing against it because it was still going on. This passing children through the fire to Molech was something that was all around, and it appears that certain areas of the land, like that area north of the Galilee in ancient Bashan, was a giant necropolis.
Yes, and when you see King Saul, that after God left him, and he wanted to know if he was going to win against the Philistines, there was no sign from God in any way that would tell him what's going to happen, and he goes and he does something that God totally forbids, and that is to go to the witch of Ov. And what is that profession? Ba'alat Ov is to bring people from the dead. And what
Yes.
does she do? She brings Samuel, the spirit of Samuel, from the dead. And Samuel, is angry at Saul for doing that. But you see that is definitely part of the Canaanite culture, that connection with the dead.
And that is something that traces back thousands of years before Saul and David. I've got a forthcoming book in which I dig into that research and found that researchers, scholars, have traced that practice back at least to the 3500 BC or thereabouts. The Hurrians, who were in the land, they're mentioned in the Bible as the Horites, were conducting rituals along those lines in northern Syria in the middle of the 4th millennium BC, a ritual necromantic pit called the Avi, which are ABI, and that word Ov in Hebrew derives from the Hurrian term for that same ritual practice, but it's also connected to the Sumerian word Abzu, which was the underground water or ocean that was the home of the god Enki. And Abzu is where we get the word the abyss,
Yes.
which is essentially what they were doing, summoning these spirits from the abyss to grant favor or tell the future. It is eye-opening thing to go to Israel and see those. In fact, we were driving through the Golan on our way to Gilgal Refaim when our tour guide, your wonderful tour guide, Yeshai Avatal, who points out there, dolmens, just on the side of the road with a little sign that says dolmen. But when we went to Mount Nebo in Jordan and saw what Moses saw to Jericho, and you realize that is what Ezekiel describes as the valley of the travelers being the term that the Canaanites used for the spirits of the dead, demons, who traveled or crossed over from the other realm. That is where he places the final battle in the war of Gog and Magog. And it's in the shadow of ancient Sodom, which has got the biggest cluster of dolmens in the Jordan River Valley. It all fits together. This is all about who's resurrected at the end of the war. What do you see when you look at these ancient sites, these dolmens? In fact, there's one in the Shamir, near the Shamir kibbutz, which has got a 50-ton capstone. Somebody 4,000 years ago figured out how to lever something weighing 50 tons on top of some structures just to commemorate the dead.
We tend to think that people that lived in the past didn't have knowledge, they didn't have the technology or the force to do things, and because we are modern and more able to do things because of our technology and our electricity and our tractors and bulldozers and cranes, but when you see these huge stones that are put together with their how they lifted it, how they brought it there, how they structured the structure in a certain way. The Gilgal Refaim, these these beautiful, perfect circles, one after the other. They didn't have drones then. I mean,
to lay out the plan. Yes.
But they were able to do that. And so, first of all, is a great admiration towards these ancient peoples that knew how to do that and had the ability to do it. And you know, the second thing is just a big question mark. Exactly why were they built? What is the meaning behind them? I think these are the two things that come up to my mind when I see those places.
I think even more than that, looking at this from the perspective of those who believe in the Creator who spoke the universe into existence and acknowledge that there are spirits who have rebelled against His authority, the reality of this spiritual war that people without modern power equipment were compelled to build these massive structures in service of these fallen entities just brings home to us, I think, the reality of this spiritual struggle in which we are all a part.
Yes, and we see that struggle going on everywhere, not just in America, in Israel, everywhere in the world. So there's a lot to learn from those sites, yes.
Aaron, we are blessed that we have made your friendship, and we look forward to seeing you soon again in the Holy Land.
Thank you.
What an amazing location, and going into the central core there and seeing the dolmen on which sun shines on the summer solstice through the little window box that was built into the ceiling more than 5,000 years ago. Just mind-boggling.
It's an amazing spot, and we know that it sits in the plain that was the place of the serpent, and that's where Og was. There was a lot of ritual activity there. So we definitely want to go back. And it isn't because we're fascinated by the fallen realm.
No.
It's because learning what they're doing is spying on your enemy. And that's a really, really important thing to do. But what I love is seeing how the Lord takes the enemy's activities, turns them on their heads, and uses them against the enemy.
Absolutely.
He reverses it again and again and again. And I can't wait to see what happens at Gilgal, because one day the Lord is coming back. And He's going to rule over all of the earth, and that includes the parts of the earth currently claimed by the fallen realm.
Yes. One of the most mysterious sites in the world, right there on the Golan Heights, and one of the Bible's greatest mysteries.